Teachers of Reddit, how easy it to tell if a student has a crush on another. And what is the funniest/saddest moment between the two you can share? Story 1. My son who is 5 has a crush on a 6-year-old at his school. She says she loves him too and she is around him all the time. He told me just yesterday that he wants to build a 3-bedroom house with a room for him, a room for her and a room for the baby they are going to have. I asked if he did not want to share a bedroom with her and he said a boy needs his space. Story 2. Former 6th grade teacher here. I was there to witness one of my kids take his first big leap. At lunch, he asked the girl he had a crush on, "Will you go on a date with me?" She smiled and said yes. Immediately the boy on the other side of her said, "Don't go out with this fucker, go out with me." She smiled and said okay. Middle school is tough, man. Story 3. This is one of my most treasured memories as a teacher. I was a student teacher, so I was not prepared for this. I asked my students to write and share their own poetry. We focused on sensory imagery, and I had the presentation staged at the local university for a bit more gravitas. Some were funny, some were surprisingly beautiful, but most were banal, and the exercise was mostly boring. This one girl got up in front of the class visibly shaking. She was near tears for her entire poem. I wanted to help her, but I had no idea what to do, so I just watched like everyone else as she poured her heart out to a boy in the class who did not reciprocate. When she finished, there was a silence in the room, and after a few seconds which seemed to stretch out forever, one of her friends stood up and ushered her out of class as the tears began to flow. Nobody made fun of her, but the boy also didn't show that he felt the same. It was just out there with no commentary. It is to this day one of the bravest acts I have ever witnessed. Story 4. I teach preschool. They tend to lack any sort of filter, so they'll just say it outright, sometimes to me, sometimes to their crush, "Matthew is my boyfriend," or "Let's get married, Julia." They will also occasionally try to kiss their crush. Today, one of my students, Gavin, kissed my hand and proposed. He's 4. It was adorable. I almost wish adult men were as upfront, although I think I'd be a bit freaked out with a proposal. Story 5. Beneath a summer sky above. Of seamless, perfect blue. He offered up his endless love. In pledges, sweet and true. I never thought the day was near. And yet, I must decline. You've got your dreams, your future, dear. And darling, I've got mine. Without a word, he dropped his head. And stood from off his knee. In time you'll understand, I said. It isn't you, it's me. In place of tender, solemn vow. I gave a hand to hold. My life's a little weird right now. And you're 4 years old. Story 6. I teach 10th graders. When I was student teaching at age 21, I was really well liked and the students told me a lot of personal stuff, probably because my age made me more approachable to 15-16-year-olds. One girl, C, would spend her study hall in my classroom during my planning period along with about 5 other students who just wanted to get out of study hall. She told me that she liked a boy, S, who also hung out in my classroom at that time. From then on, I used to group them together in class on purpose to get her to talk to him and give them an opportunity to spend some time together. I would always encourage her to ask him to hang out or tell her about things he was interested in so she could start conversations with him about it. She loved him. I think he saw her as a friend but was generally clueless about her feelings. The saddest moment between the two of them was during my planning period/their study hall. Some of the other kids that hung out in my room during that time were off running errands for me, so it was just C, S, and I in the classroom. C was a pretty overweight girl, and she was sitting on the desk part of those dumb classroom desks, and the desk completely gave out, breaking and sending her falling to the ground. I immediately shooed S out of the room, sending him to get the maintenance guy to get the desk out. When S was gone, C started bawling and was absolutely mortified. I knew she would be, which is why I sent S away quickly. I talked her through her embarrassment and by the time S got back, C was cool as a fucking cucumber and totally brushed it off. We went back to normal conversation and I'm sure S forgot about it within minutes. My student teaching ended about a month later, so I'm not sure if anything became of C and S, but I definitely still think about them sometimes. Story 7. I have this one teacher that will totally just say anything that's on her mind. One she just flat out said, "Do you guys like each other or what?" to these 2 kids in my class. Within 3 days they were dating and still are. Story 8. I work in a college and teach early morning classes to 17 to 24-year-olds, mostly. It is painfully obvious who just did a walk of shame to class and occasionally who is fucking someone else in the room. The most awkward thing that ever happened was some guy who came into the class and interrupted a lecture to hit on a girl in the front row. He wasn't even a student, just some fucker who walked by our open campus and recognized the girl through the window as the girl who he saw at Jack in the Box a week earlier. Story 9. Teenagers are not subtle by nature, but they are amazingly oblivious when it comes to matters of the heart. They are really perceptive with other things, though. The boys almost never recognize if a girl likes them, and the girls never realize a guy is showing interest. It's funny to watch it happen, it's so blatantly obvious as an outsider, but I remember being just as oblivious as a student. Story 10. Computer science/computational physics university lecturer here. Men tend to outnumber women 10:1 in my lecture groups. This has resulted in some odd scenarios, my favorite being 4 of my students simultaneously being exceedingly into the same exceedingly pretty woman who was in the realms of shy but unremittingly kind. She also happened to be a lesbian. I knew this, they did not. Of course, only 2 people could sit next to her in a lecture theater, and an actual friend of hers usually took one of those spots. So the 4 of them would try to play it cool as she sat down, then desperately try to get as close as possible without giving the game away, like a single round of musical chairs where only one person can win, but there's definitely never going to be a prize any of the players want. It's important to also be aware that these were nerds of the highest order, so at a certain point they were just running and shoving one another, charging down the aisle like the adults they apparently were. I was eventually forced to intervene and end the game when one of them honest to God vaulted a row of seats and nearly landed on another student. They deliberately avoided her after I pulled them aside, which was probably great for her, but terrible for me. I found their fruitless game a never-ending source of comedy. Story 11. Awkward story. My students are all between 8 and 10 and a few have noticeably hit the point where they are obviously starting to notice the opposite sex. I have 2 students that I'll give fake names, a boy, James, and a girl, Lucy, in my class. They are always together, recess, lunchtime, free choice, the 2 are always working together. They are both very shy and giggly and it seemed a mutual crush was there, noted by me and their math teacher as well. One day, I hear James getting teased by some other kids for his crush on Lucy. His math teacher and I pull him aside and have a talk with him. We tell him that we'll be talking with the class as a whole about crushes and teasing, he's not the only one. His math teacher also tells him that, if he does have a crush on Lucy, it's nothing to be embarrassed about because she's a nice, sweet girl. James just looks awkward and asks to go, so we let him. A few days later, I'm walking my kids out to the parent pickup and I see Lucy's dad is here to pick her up. James waves to both of them as they leave and I ask if he's been over to Lucy's house to play and if he knows her dad. Yeah, miss. That's my uncle. Oh shit. I have encouraged cousin incest. I awkwardly gather my nerves and start to say, you remember that talk we had about Lucy and liking her? Well, I didn't realize she was your cousin so dash. I thought you didn't. That was weird, miss. Then he just laughed and said he liked a different girl anyway from his older sister's class. Story 12. Miguel asked me, the AP Chem teacher, if he could write a message on the board for Mariella. Miguel was a former AP student and at that time a senior. Mariella was a current AP student and at the time a junior. Miguel, using elements from the periodic table, asked Mariella to go to the senior banquet, the biggest to-do at our school. And then Miguel asked if I would record it on my phone while he asks her. I said sure thing and I was glad to help, both were great people and good students. Miguel, during class, goes into this big long show asking Mariella. After he's done, Mariella stands up, looks straight at the phone and says, no. She then sat back down. Before this started I thought there was no way Miguel would endure public humiliation unless he knew for sure Mariella would say yes. As soon as she said no there was nothing but silence. Miguel literally dropped his head and slinked out of the room. Mariella didn't flinch. I die laughing every time I watch that video. Greatest moment of my teaching career. Story 13. I wasn't a teacher, I was a teaching helper. I mean it was only 6th grade, but it was extremely easy. Looking at everyone facing you, you start to realize what people are focusing on. I know when kids are texting because they look straight at me and every 2 minutes look down for 2 seconds and have their hands under the table. For a crush it is the long stares at the back of their crush's head whilst fiddling with an object like a pencil or their hair. The quick look away when the crush looks at them. It's easy. Sorry for question mark at first, I'm German and didn't know how to, teaching helper, correctly to say it. If anyone knows please comment or message me. Story 14. Band in high school is a funny place. Since kids are around each other a lot more of the time than the average student, they tend to get band goggles. It's pretty obvious to see relationships blossoming. More often than not it is a good thing, but every now and then you get the older upperclassmen boys going after naive freshman girls. And boy oh boy does it turn ugly quick. The drama can be outrageous. Funniest most shocking moment, a girl who is an awesome student has been dating a true player on and off for the last year. She went so far to tell me that she got back together with him after he cheated on her. So literally last Friday, I'm sitting in the band hall watching kids practice. This sweet girl comes in the hall and is walking with a sense of purpose. As she passes me, she says something under her breath that I didn't quite get the first time. Confused by what she said, I watch her walk up to said guy. She grabs him by the shoulders and spins him around. She says something to which he responds with a short answer but had that look on his face that he got caught doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing. She then balls up her fist and socks the guy 4 to 5 times and storms off. At that point, I realized what she said. SC Vanguard, you are going to have to write me an office referral. Best referral ever. Story 15. Daycare teacher to kids 6 to 11 here. It is probably one of the easiest things to pick up on. They try to play with the other, but they don't openly admit to it. They spend a lot of time near the other, without ever actually talking to them. They sit at the same table, but try to talk to different friends. Basically, they spend as much time with the other as possible without actually becoming friends. If anything about crushes is mentioned, they immediately try to direct the conversation so people talk about them and their crush. And the second the two are mentioned together, the crusher blushes. Not to brag, but I have this 10-year-old that has a pretty obvious crush on me. I mean, I'm a teenage male who spends 20 hours a week with her, so it is entirely understandable. I should mention that I don't encourage it or anything. I treat her like all the others. Granted, she is one of the oldest, so she does have more responsibility and she is able to have deeper conversations. But she tries to make my life easy. She will help clean, cook and take care of the younger kids. She does it to impress me and I sincerely appreciate it. I will say again that it is completely normal. I had crushes on babysitters, so do we all. I feel kind of bad for her now, because she puts a lot into it, but I know she'll smile looking back on it as an adult. There is another kid who is 6, maybe 7 now, who has a crush on one of the 9-year-olds. I mean, they are not entirely on the same level mentally. First grade and third grade are about as far apart as third grade and ninth grade. Night and day. So it is kind of sad because he is chasing after her. She knows, I think, about the crush and it makes her a little uncomfortable, but she is sweet about it. Story 16. I'm not a teacher, but in 6th grade, 2002, a girl in my class, history with Mrs. Thompson, sat in the next row over from me every day. I was crushing on another girl and ignorant to the fact that she liked me. Midwinter, Mrs. Thompson is handing back papers and stops between the two of us while glancing back and forth between the two of us and says something along the lines of, I don't know who to give this paper back to, her first name, or Mr., my last name, ... Mrs. Thompson hands the paper back to her. She had been practicing writing her name with my last name so much in her notebook, apparently like many teenage girls do, that she had accidentally written it on homework she handed in. 6 years later at my high school graduation, a half dozen of my former teachers including Mrs. Thompson were sitting around talking with my friends and me and brought up that paper where a girl had written my last name on her paper. They found it cute and endearing and told other various stories of middle school love. A year and a half ago, I married that girl. Story 17. 8th grade teacher here. That's right. The year hormones go absolutely haywire but sometimes in cute way. I teach a literacy block, and part of that time is spent silently reading while I do one-on-one reading conferences with the kids. During this time, kids can move about the room, so to speak. I have double-size room with a couple of couches and a ton of pillows and 2 particular students sat next to each other. These students are dating. Anyway, about 5 minutes into our sustained silent reading, it was absolutely still and silent. One of those students, boy, suddenly stood up and repositioned himself on the opposite side of his girlfriend. I noticed but didn't say a word and continued my reading conference. A few minutes later, I snuck a peek and he had reached over to clasp her left hand in his. They stayed like that for the rest of the time, both reading. She's reading The Fault in Our Stars and he's reading The Name of the Wind. Their reading tastes are part of why I love them so. P.S. He had to change sides to hold her hand because she was born without a right arm, amniotic band syndrome, I think? I know, right? Edited to add, to all the comments asking, how did she hold the book with one hand? Have you never read a book with like, say, a soda in your hand? Or a Kit Kat? Come on. Plus, she's been compensating her whole life, 13 years, for the missing limb. FYI, she is beyond brilliant, completely joyful, and is the most fabulously confident girl I've ever taught. Edited again for you logic-minded folks that are still twisting over this, okay. Picture them. They are sitting on the floor, leaning against some pillows. Side by side. Backs to a wall. Her left hand is in his right hand. She has her legs bent, another pillow is propping up her book. Hardcover. Stays open by itself on her lap. As needed, she raises up their paired hands to turn the page. He does the same. The book is in her lap, folks. Her lap. I do understand your initial confusion, though I do. Story 18. I am teaching 7th grade right now. It's crazy easy to tell. It makes me wonder if I was that obvious when I was their age, or worse, if there were girls that were that obvious towards me and I didn't notice. It's like, they don't even hide it. One of my boys carries a girl's books every day. It is clear to me that he has a crush on her. I learned recently that she has a different one of these guys to carry her books between every class. I mean, that's just manipulative. She's got to know, right? Right? Story 19. I teach English. I remember a star football player, senior, coming into the room to rap with me for a bit before third period started every Friday. In my third period, a female student, junior, of mine who was extremely intelligent and very pretty, yet somewhat shy being an AP student and all, was sitting in the front row and always stared at him when he came in. He would talk about football and stuff with me, and every so often I'd look back at her still staring right at him and smiling the entire time. She would not turn that smile off no matter who was looking or what anyone said. It was actually one of the cutest/saddest things I ever saw, seeing as how the guy never even turned around to notice her. If he did, who knows, maybe they would have hit it off. Maybe they did after they weren't my students. Story 20. I teach kids how to swim and it's so adorably obvious. The girls will talk to the boys all cutesy and the guys will be like, yeah, and look off into the distance. The cutest is when the 3 or 4-year-old boys have crushes on you and they can be pretty sly. Sometimes they'll jump off the wall knowing you have to catch them and they'll try to kiss you, or they won't think I feel their hand on my boob when we're kicking, but I feel it. That's why we use kickboards now, winky face, it's a huge confidence boost.